There is a small button sitting on almost every checkout page in America, and it is quietly rewiring how an entire generation thinks about money. It goes by a friendly, harmless-sounding name, Buy Now, Pay Later, and it promises something that feels almost generous. The pitch is simple. Take the item home today and split the cost into 4 easy payments spread across a few short weeks. No interest, no credit check, no lecture from a banker, just a smooth and painless path to whatever a shopper wants in that moment. But that painless feeling is not an accident, and it is definitely not a gift. It is the entire product, engineered down to the millisecond, and understanding why exposes something deeply unsettling about who actually profits. To see how dangerous this really is, the story has to start somewhere strange, with an idea from behavioral science called the pain of paying. Decades ago, researchers discovered that spending money physically hurts, lighting up the same regions of the brain that process genuine, tangible pain. When a person peels off cash and hands it over, that little sting acts like a natural brake on their spending. It forces a quick gut check, a half second of hesitation before the money actually leaves their hands and disappears for good. Credit cards already weakened that brake, because swiping a piece of plastic feels far less real than watching a stack of bills vanish. But Buy Now, Pay Later doesn't just weaken the brake, it removes the brake from the equation almost entirely. Therefore, a purchase that once felt heavy and serious suddenly feels weightless, as if the shopper is barely spending anything at all. Consider how that checkout actually looks through the eyes of a 19-year-old scrolling on their phone alone at midnight. A $90 pair of sneakers feels expensive, and that number alone might be enough to make them close the app. But those same sneakers, reframed as 4 payments of $22, suddenly feel almost trivial, like adding an extra side of fries. Nothing about the shoes changed, and nothing about the bank account changed. Yet the entire emotional experience of buying was quietly rewritten. That reframing is the magic trick, and it is the reason these apps can turn a person's hesitation into an instant, frictionless yes. Now, to really understand how radical this shift is, it helps to look at how young people used to buy things they couldn't afford. Generations ago, there was a system called layaway, where a shopper picked an item and paid it off slowly over time. The crucial detail is that they only received the item once every single payment had already been made in full. The reward came at the end, after the sacrifice, so the pain of paying arrived first and the pleasure arrived last. But Buy Now, Pay Later flips that ancient order completely on its head, handing over the reward long before the cost is felt. Therefore, the natural rhythm of earning something has been inverted, and an entire generation is being trained to expect the prize first. A reasonable person might now ask how any of this could possibly be free, because companies do not build empires on kindness. The answer sits in 2 places, and neither one is the place that most young shoppers are ever looking. The first source of profit is the merchant, the store itself, which quietly pays a hefty cut on every single transaction. While a typical credit card might charge a store around 2%, these installment companies often charge several times more than that. Stores happily pay the higher fee anyway. And the reason why is the most revealing part of the entire business. They pay it because shoppers who split payments reliably buy pricier items, add more to their carts, and walk away far less often. Therefore, the model rests on one simple, powerful truth. This product is engineered to make people spend more than they otherwise would. It is not a neutral payment method sitting quietly at checkout. It is a machine specifically tuned to increase the size of every order. But the second source of profit is where the story turns from clever marketing into something that starts to feel genuinely predatory. Because the whole system is designed to feel painless, it is also designed around the people who will eventually miss a payment. And the moment a payment is missed, that friendly, colorful interface vanishes, replaced by late fees that can stack up with startling speed. A shopper who split one modest purchase into 4 parts can end up paying penalties that completely dwarf whatever discount they were chasing. The product is marketed entirely on the promise of 0 interest. Therefore, almost nobody ever bothers to read the fee structure hiding underneath. And here the danger begins to compound, because unlike a normal loan, Many of these purchases are practically invisible to the outside world. A single young person might have 5 or 6 of these plans running at the same time, across different apps and different due dates. No individual lender ever sees the full picture, and often the credit bureaus can't see it either, creating what experts call phantom debt. So on paper, the shopper looks perfectly healthy and responsible, while in reality, they are juggling a dozen tiny obligations they can barely track. Therefore, the very feature that made the product feel so safe, its invisibility, is exactly the thing that makes it so quietly destructive. Now consider carefully who is most likely to be standing directly in the crosshairs of this entire, finely tuned machine. Study after study shows the heaviest users of these services are young, frequently under 35, and often living paycheck to paycheck. These are the shoppers with the thinnest financial cushions, the least experience managing debt, and the highest exposure to constant social pressure. They are also the first generation raised watching influencers unbox and flaunt new products, so the urge to keep up never truly switches off. The product does not reach them by accident, it reaches them because they are the most profitable and most persuadable audience alive. There is also a darker feedback loop hiding inside the experience, and it has far less to do with money than with feeling. Every purchase delivers a small hit of reward, a jolt of pleasure that lands instantly, while the actual cost gets shoved into the future. The brain quickly learns to crave that jolt. Therefore, the act of shopping itself becomes the reward, detached from ever needing the item. Over time, buying stops being a conscious decision and slowly becomes a habit, a reflex triggered by boredom, by stress, or a bad day. And a habit that feels completely free in the moment is one of the hardest habits in the entire world to ever break. Picture a college student who felt anxious on a Tuesday night and bought a jacket to feel something other than that anxiety. The jacket arrives, the anxiety fades for an afternoon, but the underlying feeling returns. Therefore, the next purchase is never far behind. Soon, the closet fills with things bought for a mood rather than a need, each one tied to a payment still quietly ticking. The debt was never really about clothing or gadgets. It was about a generation learning to shop its way out of hard emotions. For a long time, these companies operated in a strange legal gray zone, growing explosively while barely anyone was seriously watching them. But regulators eventually noticed the rising mountain of complaints, the missed payments, and the young customers who were quietly sinking into trouble. Watchdog agencies started asking sharp questions about disclosure, about disputes, and about whether these cheerful installments were really just loans wearing a costume. The companies pushed back hard. Therefore, the fight over how to properly regulate this industry is still unfolding in courtrooms and headlines today. Still, regulation always moves slowly, while the checkout button loads instantly. And that enormous gap is exactly where the real damage keeps happening. None of this means the underlying technology is inherently evil, or that splitting a large payment is always a foolish thing to do. Used carefully, for a planned purchase that a person can genuinely afford, an installment plan can be a perfectly reasonable financial tool. But the danger was never really the math, and it was never really the concept of paying for something over time. The danger was always the psychology carefully layered on top of that math, the part designed to switch off a person's natural caution. The product is engineered to disable the exact instincts that normally protect people from spending money they do not actually have yet. Therefore, the real question is not whether the tool works, but who, precisely, this tool was quietly designed to work against. Think of it like a casino that shrank itself down to fit inside a phone and then followed a person absolutely everywhere. The lights, the sounds, the effortless taps, every element exists to keep the shopper playing long past the point of any reason. A casino at least announces itself with flashing signs, so most people walk through the doors already knowing to keep their guard up. But a checkout button wears the friendly mask of convenience. Therefore, the guard never goes up, and the losses never quite feel like losses. That disguise is the entire danger, because a threat that looks exactly like a favor is the hardest kind of threat to resist. An entire generation is now learning to associate spending with relief instead of sacrifice, and that lesson could take decades to fully unlearn. The financial habits formed at 19 tend to harden by 30, so the true cost of this product will not surface for many years. By the time the bill for those habits finally comes due, the friendly little button will have already moved on to the next generation. Buy now, pay later did not invent debt, and it certainly did not invent temptation, but it may have perfected the delivery of both. It took the oldest trap in the history of commerce and wrapped it inside the friendliest, smoothest interface anyone has ever built. And so the most dangerous product ever sold to young people was never actually the thing sitting inside the shopping cart. It was the feeling, carefully manufactured and sold for profit, that the thing inside the cart was somehow free.